Good evening, Terra Nova. So glad that we could be together tonight. Why don't you stand up as we sing together? Here we go. I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my turn till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. And all my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of the way. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of the way. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. Your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old man, Jesus, when I met you, you called my name and I ran out of the way. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name and I out of the darkness to your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, the chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, and you called me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. It's when you called my name, I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name, I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness to your glorious day. Hey, good evening, Terra Nova. How are you doing? That's our new name. All that was the we're changing the name of the church. How are you guys doing tonight? Doing all right? Man, what a beautiful weekend and just a beautiful chance for us to gather together. You know, summertime is one of those times when our schedules kind of get sort of flexible and we start doing things we don't normally do and seeing people and family visiting and all that stuff. But to carve out a little time like we can and just meet with this family and connect with each other and connect with God and encourage each other for the week ahead. Because, you know, troubles don't stop in the summertime. You know, we have challenges. We need prayer, encouragement, and so it's great that we can gather like this. We're going to sing this song. We've been singing a little bit over this past year. It's just a great reminder that whatever we're facing, it's not really our battle, it's His battle, and we're fighting alongside the greatest, most powerful being of all time. So let's sing this song together, Battle Belongs. You guys ready? Glad to be here? Okay, awesome. Here we go. When all I see is the battle, you see my victory. When all I see is the mountain, you see the mountain moved. And as I walk through the shadows, your love surrounds me. There's nothing to fear now, for I am here with you. So when I fight, fight on my knees, my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And every fear I lay at your feet, I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And if you are for me, who can be against me? For Jesus, there's nothing impossible for you. When all I see are the ashes, you see the beauty. When all I see is a cross, oh, you see the empty tomb. It's when I fight. So when I fight, I fight on my knees, my hands lifted high. Oh God, battle belongs to you. Every fear I lay at your feet, I sing through the night. Oh God, battle belongs to you. No mighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. No mighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. And almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. Oh, you shine in the shadows. almighty fortress, and you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, and you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. An almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. Out to me, it's leading my heart to your door, and all my regret fades with each step, 'cause that's what your mercy is for. Nothing but kindness is all that you've shown. I call you Father, call me your own. When I have wandered, you've welcomed me home with nothing but kindness. Though your love is quick to forgive, believes I can be so much more. When my past is behind me at last, that's what forgiveness is for. Nothing but kindness is all that you've shown. I call you Father, call me your own. When I have wandered, you've welcomed me home with nothing but kindness. There is no mistake I could ever make that could separate your love from me. From me. And every step I take, chains begin to break. Come on, celebrate. Now I am free. Free. Kindness is all that you've shown. I call you Father, or you call me your own. When I have wandered, you've welcomed me home with nothing but kindness. Oh, you're nothing but kindness. Nothing but kindness.
Let's take a minute to pray together. Lord, as we come, we just want to soak in what we've sung about. We want to reflect on this truth that we need to be reminded of who you are and how you treat us, how you respond to us. That there is nothing that we could or have ever done that would cause you to pull away from us. You continue to show us mercy and forgiveness. You have this belief in your children that we struggle to accept for ourselves, and so we thank you for that. I pray that this act would not just be singing, but we would really be soaking in, internalizing these truths of who you are, so that when the times come where we are having a hard time being reminded of them, God, that you would help us to access those truths. But we pray that it doesn't stop with us. We want to be extensions of your mercy and your forgiveness and your grace to the world around us and the people in our lives. And so help us to do that. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, everybody. I want to welcome you to Terra Nova. It's good to be with you this weekend. And we're just pumped to be together. A few of us were talking a little bit earlier this week, and a question came up. And so the question was, hey, what was your first job? But not like first job like, I babysat down the street, but first real job, like you got a paycheck for. And we say, hey, you know what, maybe we'll try that this weekend. So I want you to take a second, say hi to some people around you, and then ask them what was their first job. Hopefully it brings back good memories. It was fun. It wasn't illegal. So have some fun, talk to some people around, and ask them what was their first real job. Well, again, it is great to have you with us this weekend. If you're tuning in line, thank you for joining us online. And thanks for coming out this weekend to be here at The Hub. My name is Scott, and I just want to welcome you. Hopefully you had a good time just connecting with some people around you, saying hey, meeting somebody new, and figuring out what they used to do way back, right? So again, a great weekend to be here at Terra Nova as we're continuing our Summer of Stories series. And so we got that coming up. We've also got a few dozen of our teenagers who are going off to a junior high and high school summer camp this weekend. And so that's great. They're going to have a fantastic week ahead. And so we are just pumped to have us gathering here at Terra Nova this weekend. And if you happen to be newer with us, it's one of your first times, or maybe your very first time with us at Terra Nova, I just want to extend a really special welcome. It means a lot to us just to have you with us, joining us this weekend. And we hope you have a great experience. One of the first things that hopefully happened is we were able to put one of these guys in your hand. If you got a weekend program, looks just like this, you can pull it out. You'll find that there's a number of things in there that you can spend some time reading a little bit later on. But the very first thing we'd love to have you do, especially if it's one of your first times with us, is flip to this guy right here. We call this flap our Connect card. And what you can do is go ahead and fold it over, tear it off just like I'm doing. And we would love to hear from everybody. But again, especially if it's one of your first times, we would just love to follow up with you. And so you can fill this guy out. The front side, feel free to share as much information as you feel comfortable sharing. You'll notice that there's different boxes you can check to get more information about things. The backside, you can let us know if there's any way we can serve you or pray for you. But again, we would love to hear from everybody. And as you fill this out, just know, hey, if you check this box of going, hey, it's my first, second, or third time, and you fill out a Connect card this weekend, we're going to make a donation on your behalf to the Orange County Rescue Mission. Great organization we love partnering with. You're actually going to hear about them a little bit more a little later on. But we would love to get that Connect card from you. And so you can spend a little bit of time working on that Connect card right now. And as I mentioned, we are always just so pumped to have anybody joining us for one of the first times. And you know, when you go somewhere new, you're always kind of wondering, hey, what are these people like? What's this place like? What do they value? And the same thing comes for any church. You're going, okay, well, what are they really like? And why do they do that? And what's the story behind this? And so as we are approaching kind of the end of summer, we've got this great next step for anybody kind of wondering about what Terra Nova is all about. We call it the Terra Nova Tour, and it's happening on Sunday, August 28th. This is a great afternoon where you have this interactive discussion where you get to hear about the history of Terra Nova, our values, our beliefs. You get to hear about why we are the way that we are and do the things that we do. And if you haven't been to a tour before, I want to invite you to come out. Again, free lunch is provided for you, childcare if you need it. And so to sign up for the tour, what you're going to do is grab your Connect card, And then somewhere on it, you're just going to write Tour Me on that Connect card, and we'll get you all set up for that. And we would love to invite you out, especially if you've never been before. And it's also a great pathway. It's our membership pathway in case you're interested in becoming a member at Terra Nova. But spoiler alert, one of the things that you're going to learn at the Terra Nova Tour is that we have this desire to be a type of community where we're not just receiving the love and the grace and the goodness of God for ourselves, but we are extending that to the people around us, around the world, but also here in our community. And so one of the things that we do is we try to get out and just serve people to make God's love famous. And in just a couple Saturdays, we've got a great opportunity to do just that. It's called Serve Day at the Abbey, and it's happening here on Saturday, August 6th. And so we're going to be at the Abbey. If you don't know about the Abbey, this is the latest property of the Orange County Rescue Mission, and we've been working with them this year to get this property ready to open up. And so it's just down the street at El Toro, right kind of by Cook's Corner, and it's a great opportunity if you've got little ones. Any age is welcome to come out. We're going to be there from 9 to noon on the 6th, maybe doing painting, demolition work, all sorts of different things that are going on. But again, it's just our way to get out inside the community to make God's love famous and just to be an extension of who God is to us, to the people around us. To sign up for the Serve Day at the Abbey, what you can do, again, grab your Connect card, write Serve Day on that, and we'll get you all set up for that. And so those are a couple things that we've got going on. You can read more about everything that we have happening in your program. You'll see a bunch of great opportunities to connect in there. But we're excited right now to jump into the next installment of our series that is called The Summer of Stories. Let's check it out.
All right. Hey, good evening. How you guys doing? Welcome to Terra Nova. Whether you're watching online, as some of you are, or here in the room, we are in this series called Summer of Stories that I've been loving. I hope you've been loving too, and so glad to have you guys here. We started out this series just talking about stories and how powerful that stories can be, that they, in fact, smarter people than me think and write about such things. Stories create a world for our imaginations and invite us into them. They invite us to imagine ourselves in a world where people have superpowers or they're dinosaurs or something in the future, in the past, and we begin to identify, without necessarily intending to, with characters or struggles or plots or such. We start to find ourselves in it a little bit, which is part of the power of stories, that they have the power, whether they're on the page or on the screen or just a story someone's telling, they have this power to actually begin to shape what we think and what we value, that bypasses our rational minds. And so that's a thing. And maybe it's because of the power of the stories that Jesus used stories so often when he taught. And we call these stories parables, which comes from a Greek word, parallel, set something beside another thing, which is a word that refers to a whole wide range of word pictures or such that Jesus would use when he talked. Riddles, proverbs, metaphors, word play, and of course, these stories that he would tell. And his stories and his sayings are full of twists and surprises, especially in their original context. And many of them are shocking, even scandalous. A lot of his stories involve this reversal of expectations. Like, things normally work this way in the world, but in this story, everything's opposite, everything's different. And many of the stories that we consider like nice little stories, in their original settings were not nice stories at all. People didn't walk away smiling. They walked away frustrated. These are stories that are told to disrupt us, even confuse us, make us scratch our head and walk away thinking and pondering. And that's exactly why Jesus would use these stories. And many of his stories, a lot of his stories, in one way or another, had to do with money. With money. In fact, out of the 40 or so parables or stories that Jesus told, and people disagree, like, is this a parable or is that just a metaphor? But around 40 of them, 16 of them actually have to do with money and possessions. Now, if you start to feel a little uncomfortable that just got brought up, maybe it'd be helpful for you to know that though Jesus talked about money a lot, he actually never asked anyone for it. He never took up a collection. He never asked people for money. See, Jesus didn't talk about money because he wanted something from us. Jesus talked about money so much because he wanted something for us. Because Jesus knew something about money and us. And he knew that money had the power to get us all twisted up and sideways in our priorities, our relationships, our time, our lives, that we get all twisted up and sideways over money and stuff. And isn't that true? Does that ever happen? Oh yeah, oh yeah. And Jesus knew this. Money is a helpful means, but it is a terrible end. Money is a helpful means, but it is a terrible end. Money can add meaning to your life, but money is not the meaning of life. And when money or possessions or stuff, better stuff, more stuff, nicer stuff, their stuff, look at that stuff. When stuff starts to become the end, like the ambition, the bullseye on the target, we actually miss out on the meaning of life. And Jesus knew that was true, and he knew how easy it was for us to go there. In fact, this is something you may have never thought about, but I think it's true. Using money as a means to an end is what makes money meaningful. Using money as a means to an end, not the end in itself, but as a means to an end, is actually what makes money meaningful. And the greater the ends, the greater the meaning, the greater the ends to which you put your money as a means, the more meaningful money actually is. In fact, when you think about it, and this might actually be why you're here, like this was worth getting dressed up for and coming out tonight, right here, like this little piece might be why you're here, because maybe you wonder a little bit about the meaning of things. You want life to be more meaningful, and what is the meaning of my life? This is really true whether you've ever thought of it or not. Being a means to an end is what makes anything meaningful. Being a means to an end is what makes anything or anyone meaningful. In other words, meaning and purpose is derived from being a means to an end greater or bigger than myself. The meaning of a purpose or the purpose of a thing or an organization or frankly a person or a community actually becomes from being a means to a greater end. So cars exist to move people from one place to the other, right? Mouthwash exists to kill the germs that cause bad breath, right? Movie tickets exist to get you into the theater, and to the extent that they are used toward that end, they are meaningful, and to the extent that they sit in your medicine cabinet or your driveway or your pocket, they are not very meaningful. Isn't that really true? And what gives anything or anyone meaning is when they become a means to an end that is bigger and greater than themselves. And that is actually really true of you. That's actually really true of me. If you want to have a meaningful, a purposeful, a significant life, or for that matter, organization or group or marriage or family, you must decide to become a means to an end that's bigger than just you and your few. And the greater the ends, the greater the meaning. And one more thought before we jump into this story, just one more. And when you decide to be a means to an end, when you decide that your life is going to be about something bigger and more important and beyond you, guess what? Your money actually becomes a means to that end as well. When you decide your life is going to be about something bigger than you, your money comes along for the ride. And that is exactly what Jesus taught in one of his strangest parables of them all. The story is told by a guy named Luke. Luke was a doctor, and apparently a quite remarkable historian. Historians today find Luke's history's very remarkable and very well done. He's obviously a really bright guy. He was not one of the original followers of Jesus. He was not a disciple of Jesus. He wasn't a Christian. He was a companion eventually of a guy named Paul. We actually don't know how he began as a person to say, I'm going to follow in the way of Jesus, but he became a close companion of Paul, and then eventually he knew them all. In fact, he knew Mary, the mother of Jesus. You've probably heard of her. He knew James, Jesus' brother. I don't know if you knew of him. He knew John. Maybe you've heard of John or the Apostle John. He knew them all. And in fact, as the Jesus movement began to spread and expand in the first century world, he decided he wanted to write a biography of Jesus, and he sat down with all of them and interviewed them and got their stories and compiled this biography of Jesus that we know of as the Good News according to Luke. And he tells this story, and as he tells this story that we're going to look at, he places it, and this is kind of important, he places it in the context of a series of 3 stories that Jesus just told, very famous stories about lost things. There's this lost sheep, and there's this lost coin, and there's this lost son, and the extent to which the person who lost it would go to find that thing that was precious to him. And Jesus tells that story. There's this kind of running gun battle, if you will, this ongoing conflict between Jesus and some very religious, very proper, very upright people who do all the right things, and they disapprove of the people that Jesus is hanging out with all the time. They are sinners. They're not religious people. We don't even know what they believe. We definitely know what they do, and it's not necessarily good stuff, and Jesus is always hanging around with them. And so Jesus tells these 3 back-to-back stories to explain how precious and how valuable these people are to their Heavenly Father, and how He would do anything to get them back in relationship with Him. He wants them back. And by the way, He wants you back. If you've been kind of pushing God away or far from, He wants you back as well. Those are stories about all of us. And then, immediately after those 3 stories, He turns to His disciples. He turns to His disciples. Now, there are a lot of people gathered around listening to Jesus, and they're often where there's some very religious people. There's some very irreligious people. There are some foes who are against Him. There are some fans who think He's the bomb, but that's they're just caught up in the hysteria of it. And there are a number of people who consider themselves followers. I am following this leader, this teacher, this rabbi, Jesus. I am his student. And He turns to them. Now, here's what that means. If you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this story at this point, like the other 3 stories, may be very much for you. At this point, you just need to know He's talking to people who say they follow Him. So you can just kind of check back and okay, I'm going to see what this guy has to say, which is exactly what the people in the crowd who were not His followers did at this moment. But then if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, you just need to know this one's for you. And it's for me, and so you can kind of listen in, and you might you might not like the punchline, but you can follow along. So He turns to His followers in the context of all these far from God people that God just cares about so much, and they're standing right there in the audience, and He tells this story right here. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting or squandering his possessions. Now, little background, most wealthy people in this day, and in fact, for most days, for most of history and in most contexts, had their wealth in land. And in real estate, not in shopping malls or storage units, by the way, but farmland, farms, vineyards, ranches, orchards. They had their wealth in land, and then they would have people who would live on those lands and run those farms or orchard villages, and as tenants. They were tenant farmers, and they would live there, and they would grow the crops, and then they would give the landowner a portion of the yield from the land as their right to live on that land and make their own living off of it. And so this guy has so many of those that he needs a manager to run all of his assets, to run his portfolio of estates, if you will. And that's what this man is. He is a manager, or the old school word is steward. That's what that word, years ago, the word for a person would be, who did that would be a steward. They are a steward of someone else's stuff. The idea is, none of it actually belongs to this guy. None of this land, none of the yield, none of the wealth belongs to, he's taking care of it for the actual owner. And that is actually the idea behind so much of what Jesus has to say about money and possessions. It's sometimes called the stewardship principle. The stewardship principle says very simply, we are managers, not owners. We are managers. We are not owners of stuff. None of it's ever really ours in any full and final sense. The stuff, the possessions, the relationships, your family, your children, they don't actually belong to you. And eventually you will figure that out if you're a young parent. Like, they got their own thing going on. They don't belong to me. And that's just none of it's really mine in any full and final sense. And the way you know that for sure is you don't get to keep any of it. Like you came into this world with empty hands and you leave it the same way. In fact, do me a favor, and I'm not going to throw anything at you, so you can do this. Set your hands out just kind of in front of you. If you want to be like really discreet about it, you can just put them in your lap. But just do that for a second and look at your empty hands. You came into this world with empty hands, and you will leave it the exact same way. And in between those two moments, everything that passes through your hands will eventually pass out of them, either because that moved on or you moved on. Everything, everything and everyone in your life will come into your hands and eventually pass out of your hands. And the question of the stewardship principle, the question to ask myself is, what did I do with it while it was in my hands? What did I do with this relationship? What did I do with this child or this parent? What did I do with this money? What did I do with this house? What did I do with it while I had the responsibility for it? It's the stewardship principle. And so this manager has been misusing the owner's resources. He's been acting like it's his own, like he gets to do with it whatever he wants to. And so the owner calls him in and says, hey, what's this I'm hearing about you? Like people are talking. You need to give an account of your management because you cannot be my manager anymore. You need to give an account, which, by the way, is a corollary to the stewardship principle. You might call it the accountability principle. And it goes right along with the stewardship principle and says, I will give an account. We will give an account. Nothing that we have is ours. It's all, we are managers of it. And someday we will all give an account for what we did with it while we had the responsibility for it. And so this wealthy landowner calls this manager in and says, okay, like you are so fired, right? But first he's got to get the books in order to present an account of what he did with it while he had responsibility for it. And the manager is completely caught off guard. He did not see this coming, and he says, what shall I do now? What am I going to do now? I wasn't expecting this. I did not see this coming. I didn't realize that this part of my story was going to end so quickly. What am I going to do now? I have a limited amount of time. I have a limited amount of opportunity. What will I do now? I've got to act fast. The master, he says, is taking away my job. And I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. It's typical. Jesus is such a good storyteller. He'd always tell stories to the extreme. And these are pretty much, in the ancient world, the two extreme sides of what happens when you don't have resources. Digging was considered the most arduous form of manual labor because it's hard work. He's like, I'm a white-collar guy. I'm not going to do that. And I got my pride. I don't want to beg, but I've got a very narrow window of time. There's some urgency here and a very narrow window of opportunity to ensure that my future will be okay. And then he has this eureka moment, and he gets an idea, and he says, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people are going to welcome me into their houses. And he comes up with this plan that will virtually guarantee that when this part of his life ends, because it is about to end, he has somewhere to go. There will be a line of people ready to welcome him into their houses and take care of him. So here's his plan. You're like, what is he going to do? He calls in each one of his master's debtors, these tenants, and there are a lot of them. His master owns a lot of farms and who owe percentage of crops to him, and so he begins to call them all in. And the first one he asks, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, the man replied. Now, this is no small amount. This man is a tenant on and is running a very large olive tree orchard because that percentage of the yield is a huge amount. This is like 3 years, the value of this is about 3 years worth of the average day's work. I mean, this is a big amount. And so the manager says, well, take your bill and sit down quickly. Sit down quickly before anybody sees, before anybody realizes you were here. I only have a little time left. Sit down quickly and make that 450. He cuts the guy's debt in half. This is thousands of dollars. And the debtor is like, really? Are you sure? Thank you. That is so incredibly generous and so generous of the owner, of the landowner. That is so generous. Thank you so much. And by the way, if there's ever anything you need, you just call me. And the manager's like, well, thank you. I'll keep that in mind. And then he calls the next debtor, the next tenant farmer in. He says, how much do you owe? Now, this guy runs a wheat farm, and it is a very big wheat farm because he owes 1,000 bushels of wheat, which is way more than the olive oil. And so this is, he has some significant pull. This is a big guy. And again, he tells him, we'll sit down quickly and make your bill 800. And again, now the percentages are a little different, but that is about the same value of the debt that he canceled for the other guy. Again, it is a huge cut. It is like thousands of dollars. And again, the debtor is like, really? Really? Oh, yeah, just jump on that real quick. We're just trying to wrap some things up. We're just finishing some things off. Just go ahead and write down 800 there. Well, thank you. I mean, I didn't expect that. That is so generous of you and your boss. You make sure you tell him how grateful I am. And by the way, if there's anything you ever need, and it's like, well, I'll keep that in mind. Now, Jesus just gives a couple of examples. We're to understand that there were many. Like, if this was a movie, this would cut into a whole montage scene of like a revolving door of people walking through and going, oh, really? Well, thank you. And again and again. It is a fire sale on his master's or his owner's debt. Now, to appreciate the craftiness of what this guy is doing in the scene, the manager's financial intrigues, if you will, a couple of things that are helpful to know about ancient culture. The first one is this. This is a culture that is highly sensitive to the idea of favors. Very quid pro quo, tit for tat. There is nothing that has no strings attached. Everything in life has strings attached. You invite somebody over to your house for dinner, there is a string attached. There is an assumed debt that gets created by that. You give someone alms. You help somebody through something. You go over there and help them. Everything has strings attached, and everybody knows it, which means some people get pretty sensitive. Like, I don't know if I want to go over their house. I don't know if I want to owe them that. I don't know if I want to be in debt. I mean, it is very, very sensitive to the idea of favors, and the manager is acting in the owner's name, handing out these generous discounts, which results in this great PR for the owner because people are seeing him as this guy's amazing. He is so generous. He is so kind. But if he reneges on that, he will lose that. The manager has ingratiated himself to all of these people who frankly have quite a bit going for them. It is unthinkable that they are going to allow him to be homeless. The second thing to keep in mind is that this culture is also very attuned to saving face. It's sometimes called an honor-shame society, and there are many societies in the world today like this, where you're gaining honor or avoiding shame is the most valuable thing in life. In fact, taking your own life in order to avoid shame and maintain your honor as an honorable person is worth that versus actually being shamed. So again, very, very different world, and it is unthinkable that they would allow him to be homeless, and it is unthinkable that the wealthy guy would renege on these debt, on these cancellations, and publicly shame his manager, I never approved of that. You guys still owe me every penny. He would lose so much face. And so this conniving manager with all of his financial intrigue has painted this wealthy guy totally into a corner. He has just painted him into a corner. It is brilliant. Totally dishonest and very, very brilliant. And so when the boss finds out about it, what do you think he's going to say? And this is a bit of the surprise of the story right here. So the master finds out he commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly, so cleverly, so wisely, which is just kind of shocking to us. It's like, okay, wait a minute, time out. So is Jesus rewarding dishonesty here? Is that what's going on? This story is a little uncomfortable. No, he's not. It's a parable. It's just a story. He's just telling a story. But that story would not have all been shocking in its original context because there are a lot of ancient stories from Egypt to Greece to beyond, well into Arabia and up into Europe that often commended craftiness and deceit and trickery and cunning. Stories like the Arabian Nights, Aladdin and the Genie, a story that you may have heard of, especially the original version of it, less so the Disneyized version of it that waters it down a little bit, where there's a hero that's using his cunning and his craftiness and actual deceit and subterfuge to best his opponents, especially when that hero is the social inferior, like Aladdin, the street urchin, or a manager of a wealthy person's farms, when Aladdin is using cunning and deceit to best the most powerful people in the kingdom, and even the genie himself, it's like, oh, that is just beautiful. That's just heroic. And that's the kind of story this is. It's that kind of story. It's a story of trickery and craftiness, and people are kind of leaning in oh, I kind of like this guy. He's dirty and criminal, but I kind of like him. And it's a story of a social superior who is willing to acknowledge that he has been bested. And so the owner commends the dishonest manager, not for his dishonesty, but for his shrewdness, because he is so clever, because this guy thought it through. He thought it through with the future in mind, with a limited amount of time and a limited amount of opportunity, and with resources that weren't actually even his own. He thought of a way to secure his future. And so the master, the owner, says, well played. Well, you are so fired, but well played. I mean, I got to hand it to you. You worked the angles. That was clever. And then Jesus pulls out of the parable to tell us the point. It's what is the point of that story? That's kind of a weird story. And he teaches them a lesson from this intriguing story. Get it? Intriguing, financial intrigue. It's not very good. Don't waste any brain cells. Anyway, so it's an intriguing story, and he pulls this lesson from the perspective of the kingdom of God, the right side up kingdom of God, growing up in the middle of this upside down world, and how precious, how valuable to God are those who are lost to him, and how God views wealth, and it is very different from the way we do wealth. And here's what Jesus says as he pulls out of the story. For, he says, the people of this world, or literally the people of this age, in other words, people for whom there is nothing more to this life than this life. This is all they're living for. It's what they see, what they can get, what they can hold on to on this little rock for this little brief of time. And if there is a God, he's probably not interested in our lives, or he's off doing something else. For the people of this world, or the people of this age, they are more shrewd. They are more clever, more crafty in thinking through their own future and the current circumstances and working angles and pushing the boundaries to get what they want. They are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind, with their own place in life, with the world around them, than are the people of light, the people who are living in the light, who are supposed to be the light of the world. And the implication is, as Jesus says this, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that they're more shrewd. It actually should be the other way. The money manager is commended for taking full advantage of his limited time and resources that aren't even his resources to secure his future. And Jesus' point actually is, we're to do the same. We're actually to be more like that guy. His followers should be doing the same thing with our limited amount of time and the urgency and our limited amount of resources that aren't even ours. And there's this sense in the story of there's now and then there's going to be later. And this part of the story is going to come to an end. So we are to be shrewd and crafty and clever in doing something now that will actually bring about something later. And what is it that we want to bring about later? And at this point, Jesus leans in. And remember, there's this mix of people listening to Jesus. There's his disciples, and then there's these people that were considered sinners by the other people, and then there's the really uber religious. I mean, there's this mix of people. And he leans in and he says, I tell you, now I'm making the point, use because it's a tool. Use because it's a means to an end. Use worldly wealth. Use the stuff that passes through your hands in this blink of an eye that you get right here. You use that to gain friends for yourself. Just like that money manager used what he had to gain friends for himself, you use what you have to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, and it will be gone, when it is gone, and it will be gone, or you will be gone, but the result is the same. When it is gone, you will be welcomed. There will be a line of people inviting you not into temporary dwellings, but into eternal dwellings. See, according to Jesus, money is a means. Money is a means to, it is not the end, it is not the purpose. Money is a tool, if you will. It is a tool that is meant for a greater purpose, for causes bigger than ourselves. And there is something that we can do with that tool right now that will actually affect the eternal future. I mean, think about that. Our right now resources can actually make a forever difference. It is a means to an end, which just kind of forces the question, I think, how can I leverage what I have as a means to an end that is greater than me? How can I leverage what I have as a means to something that is greater and bigger and more important than I am? And when you, if you approach money, this like temporary, just blink of an eye world, it can't take it with you, wasn't yours to begin with anyway, money, with that same kind of craftiness and urgency, and I got to figure something out and cunning to gain not temporary friends. I mean, hey, like if you get some great friends because like you use your money to bless them, that's great. Not just temporary friends who invite you over to their house, but eternal friends who invite you into their eternal homes. What would that be like? Now, to be clear, Jesus is not trying to make a point about heaven. Like, you're going to need a place to stay. Like, you don't want to be homeless in heaven. You better make sure, he's not trying to make a point about heaven. He's making a point about money. He's making a point about our stuff. Like, you should look at stuff that way. You should use stuff and money as a means to a potentially much greater end. Here's the point of the story. Use earthly resources to build eternal friendships, eternal relationships. Use those earthly resources to build eternal relationships, just like that guy in the story. Just like that crafty guy used resources that weren't even his to create all of these relationships, this long line of people indebted to him, inviting them into their house, and hey, come stay with me. So too, we're to think about our resources that way, about our stuff that way, things that aren't really ours, to populate heaven. To populate heaven and gain eternal friends and create long lines of people who are eager to invite us into their homes on the other side of eternity. And as followers of Jesus, and if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, we get to do this personally all day long, every day, just thinking about our finances and thinking about our resources this way. How am I blessing other people in a way that's not just temporary, but actually could be eternal? But get this, the very first followers of Jesus came to realize that we get to do so much more collectively. We get to do so much more as a community than any of us could ever do alone. pooling and leveraging our resources collectively. And so they began to do that. In fact, if you've been around Terra Nova for any length of time, you may have noticed at the end of our gatherings, just, hey, we're going to receive the offering and we're going to do this. And maybe like you've wondered, what's that about? Like that whole thing, like I get some of the other stuff. And so is this just like paying bills? And I had a bag of popcorn earlier and I drank a cup of coffee. So is that like $5? Like, am I just trying to pay my way here? It is so much bigger than that. It is us believing to our core that collectively we can do so much more when we pool our resources to make an eternal difference in the lives of others. So I was thinking about this because exactly right now, a year ago, we were in the process of lining up these projects. We had this harebrained scheme, these projects that were bigger than us. They were both global and local. And if you were around, you remember we started talking about, hey, we want to send hundreds of wheelchairs to Egypt, to this organization that we work with, that we respect so much. They're so good at doing what they do in Cairo, Egypt, in a place in the world where disabilities create shame for people just because they have them. That people with disabilities, people who cannot walk, are considered less human than other people and are often ostracized. And an act like this is actually an act that elevates them and elevates their dignity. It is such a beautiful thing, and we are so inspired by that, and we love this organization. And they're working with the disabled community in Cairo, Egypt. And we're like, hey, we want to do that. And so we were coming up with this list of things. And then, if you remember exactly a year ago, the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, creating this huge humanitarian crisis there as well. And that was happening right as we were making our plans. So we're like, okay, then we need to even up our goals here, because we knew some people who were going to be deeply involved in that and could make a real beautiful difference. And so if you were here, you remember we set what Jim Collins in his book Good to Great calls a BHAG. You ever, any Jim Collins fans? Maybe no business fans. A big, hairy, audacious goal. And we were like, hey, let's, above and beyond everything else we do, just over the next couple months, short-term goal, raise $60,000 so that we can do this. And we threw that out, not really sure how it would go. And if you're around, you know how it did go. We did not raise $60,000. We did not raise $80,000 or $100,000. We raised $180,000. Like just that generosity. And we're like, well, then we're going to do a lot to leverage that for good. And then shortly after that, Russia invaded the Ukraine. And they were like, well, we have resources and we know people and we can make a difference in that area. And we can love people so well. And then, by the way, almost a year later, this has been a tough uphill battle. The wheelchairs that we were wanting to put together, there's so many complications with shipping. You can just imagine how crazy life is right now. Finally, that has settled, and we are right now purchasing 200 wheelchairs in Egypt, which is pretty cool because they're making them there. And they were like, hey, let's do this here locally. And so we actually help the local economy, which is a beautiful thing, and we bypass the whole shipping craziness, which is just nuts right now. And so right now this is happening. They're going to distribute 50 of those chairs right away because they have people who need them. And then they would like to bring a team of us over, because they know who we are, to distribute the other 150 sometime this fall. And so you're going to be hearing about a trip to Egypt, and you want to jump in on that. Like, I want to be a part of that. Can you imagine being there as lives are being touched in this way? But this is the idea, the picture that Jesus is painting for us. He's like, here's a world, imagine this. Come in and imagine this with me. The picture is you arriving in heaven, moments after you've passed, now on the other side of eternity, and there are all these people. There are all these people that you have never met before, or you met in passing, or you saw briefly from Africa and from Indonesia and from Afghanistan and from Orange County, and refugees from Syria and the Ukraine, and disabled people from Egypt, and they're lining up to meet you. They're lining up to meet you and to thank you, and they're like, you're here. You're finally here, to invite you into their homes for dinner or a week or a month or a year. Hey, it's eternity. You got all the time in the world, so that you can know their story and they can tell you how much they appreciate the fact that you used resources that you couldn't keep anyway to make a difference in the lives of people for eternity, because of the way you used money in this age not just for you and your few, which there's nothing wrong with that, not just for you and your few, but you leveraged it shrewdly, and you thought it through, and you thought about things that would make a difference and would better the lives of others and bring them to know the Heavenly Father who loves them and wants that relationship with them, and now they can't wait to tell you their stories. And Jesus is saying, you ought to factor that in. You ought to factor that in to the way you look at money in this age, on this side of that equation. And the question becomes, do I want better stuff or do I want better stories? Do I want better stuff or do I want better stories? Do I want better houses, better cars, better things in my closet? Do I want better iPhones or do I want better stories? And here's what you need to know. At the end of people's lives, and I don't know how many people you have seen at the end of their lives, but I have seen a lot of people at the end of their lives and their families right after the end of their lives. And at the end of people's lives, people are not talking about their stuff. They're not talking about their better stuff. They're telling stories. And at the end of your life, they're going to tell stories. They're going to tell stories about you. What kinds of stories do you want them to tell? Do you want better stuff? Or do you want great stories? Do you want eternal stories? And Jesus is saying, listen, I might be able to see something that you can't see quite as clearly as I can at the end. At the end of this age, in the age to come, friends, it's people. It's people. It's eternal friendships. It's the relationships that we are bringing with us into eternity because of something we did in the here and now with stuff that we couldn't even keep anyway. Money can add meaning to your life. Money can add meaning to your life when you use it as a means to an end that's bigger than you. And the greater the ends, the greater the meaning. And then Jesus continues. He gives a little proverb, a little principle, if you will. It's kind of like a general truism. And then he asks a couple questions about it. And the principle goes like this. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever's dishonest with very little, they're going to be dishonest with much. Trustworthy with little, trustworthy with much, dishonest with little, dishonest with much. Now, we tend to think that's not true. It's like, okay, Jesus, I see where you're going there, but I kind of disagree because when I get more, I'll be better. And I have people say this to me all the time, like, hey, when I get more, and by the way, I don't know how much anyone gives, so please do not say things like this for me. It's not good for my head. When I know we don't give anything. Again, I wouldn't know that. I'll assume you're the most generous person on the planet. We don't give it, but if we get more, then we'll give something. And Jesus goes, Actually, rule of thumb is people tend to do with a lot exactly what they do with a little. If you're generous with a little and you got a little bit, and so you're generous a little with the little, then as you get more, you'll probably be generous with more. If you're not generous at all with little because you only have little, chances are you're not going to be generous with more. It's something that we are so inclined to deceive ourselves about. I call it the win-then myth. What we do with this now is exactly what we're probably going to do with that later. And according to Jesus, money is a tool and it's a test. It's a tool and it's a test. It's a test of our trustworthiness, he says. It's a test of our devotion. And it's a test of our allegiance, really. It's a test that, according to Jesus, actually has eternal ramifications. And like that crafting manager, we have just a little bit of money and a little bit of time, and there's some urgency, and there's this short window. And what we do with it now, while we have responsibility for it, indicates it's a test of whose kingdom we are actually most invested in, devoted to, where we are most aligned. And so, having laid out this proverb, this principle, he asks a pair of questions. The questions he asks are these. So, if you haven't been trustworthy with worldly wealth, this little bit that you have right here, who's going to trust you with true? Who's going to trust you with true? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, it's like, oh, wait a minute, Jesus, this is mine. I earned this. I worked for this. I'm not managing somebody else's stuff. I'm the owner in the story. This, again, is basic to Jesus' worldview. Just like the guy in the parable, we are all managers, not owners. We are managers, not owners. If you're going to eventually leave it all anyway, and you will, and I will, if everything and every relationship in your life passes into your hands and ultimately out of your hands, for the short little time you hold it, you are responsible for it, then clearly we are managers, not owners. We are stewarding it. We are responsible for it, but it's really someone else's. And the real question is, how will you manage it? What kind of steward or manager will you be? Shrewd, trustworthy? What kind of manager will you be? And Jesus is saying, listen, you need to manage it with the end in mind. You need to manage what you have as a means to an end that is greater than you. And then Jesus lands it. He lands the whole thing, and he leaves us with a choice. Very typical of Jesus. It's very black and white. It's very either or, and it's a choice of our allegiance, because money is a test. It's a tool, and it's a test. It's a choice of our allegiance. And he begins with something we all know. He says, here's what he says next. No one can serve two masters. Now, we all know this, right? I don't know if you've ever worked in an organization that had a funky org chart where you had numerous different bosses and you weren't really sure who you were responsible to, and then maybe they had different points of view, and so you felt tugged between them. Or maybe you grew up in a home where your parents were either divorced or just badly misaligned, and they had different points of view, and they were pulling in different directions. And here's what you know. You cannot please both. You get pulled between, your loyalties get divided. It is not a fun place to be, right? And so everybody's nodding, and they're like, yeah, that's really true, that's true. And then he says, this is maybe a surprise, you cannot serve both God and money, because they are pulling in two different directions. And when stuff becomes the end, when stuff becomes the end and not the means, it becomes our master. And we begin to serve it, thinking about it, worrying about it, wondering about it, rearranging our lives around it, getting sideways with relationships and human beings over it, getting into debt and leveraging ourselves for it. When money becomes the ambition, when stuff becomes the bullseye on the target, we all get sideways. And Jesus says, this is tough to swallow. He says, if that's where you're at and money is pulling your strings, you cannot serve God. It's like, oh, no, Jesus. I mean, I know I live in Orange County and I got all this. I still believe in God. You cannot actually serve God if money is pulling your strings. But if you or if I, just like that guy in that crazy story, make money the means to an end that is bigger than ourselves and greater than ourselves, money becomes a tool, and it is serving us. And for followers of Jesus, it becomes a tool for one of the ways that we serve God and his right side up kingdom in this world, which is exactly where Luke takes Jesus and us next in the story. And you need to read the rest of the story for yourself after that. But Jesus at this point just leaves it right there. He just sets that on the table like that, and he leaves us to walk away pondering, thinking to ourselves, is that true? Is this story, is that whole story, does that have actually something to say to me? Am I actually supposed to be kind of like that guy? What am I going to do with it? And Jesus doesn't actually give us the application. So here are the 5 things that you do to make eternal friends. He doesn't actually play it out for us. He expects us to do the hard, shrewd work ourselves and figure that out. So to wrap it up, I just thought, here's a question. Here's a question for us that I want you to wrestle with this week that maybe will disturb you or bother you. Maybe the story disturbs you and bothers you. It should. It was intended to. And here's the question. If being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning, and it is. Being a means to an end is what gives anything or anyone meaning. If being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning, to what ends do you want your life to be a means? To what ends do you want your life to be a means? What do you want? And this is a question you can ask whether you think you're following Jesus or what do you want people to celebrate about you? What stories do you want them to tell about you when you're gone? What better stories? What eternal stories, if you will, might you want people to tell about you? What breaks your heart? What just messes with you that you actually could do something about? You could become a means towards that end, and your resources could follow you. What would you like people to line up at the end of your life, or maybe moments after the end of your life, and thank you for What ends do you want your life to be a means? Now, here's the cool thing. If you answer that question, if I answer that question, your money will follow. Your money will follow you, and it will become a means, and your money and your life will become more meaningful. But until you answer that question, you may just end up following your money and serving it. So this week, today, as you leave, just ask yourself this question. If being a means to an end is what gives my life meaning, to what ends do I want my life to be a means? And when you identify that and you lean into the meaning of your life and your money will become a lot more meaningful as it was intended to be. Now, one last question, and I'm going to close this in prayer. Because I keep talking about this thing, Jesus is talking to followers. He's talking to his followers. Like there were these foes that were around him that were against him. There were these fans who were like, Jesus is like really cool. I don't know what I used to think of him, but I'm pretty much a fan now. And then there were people who had said, I'm going to follow Jesus. And I've been saying that that's who this story is told to. Maybe that stuck with you a little bit. It's like, well, am I a follower? Am I, what would I be considered? Am I a fan? Am I a foe? I mean, what am I? And maybe there was a time in your life where you honestly, if you were honest, you'd say, I was maybe a bit of a foe. I was really not on the Jesus bandwagon. I didn't even know what I thought about him. I was maybe a little bit foe, but maybe lately you've been reconsidering that a bit, thinking through that a little bit. Like, is there more to Jesus? Is he someone I can admire, actually relate to, lean into, appreciate? Is there something more to him? Or maybe you have actually never made a conscious decision to be a follower of Jesus. Maybe you didn't even know that was a thing, to declare him to be your leader, or the old school word is Lord, like the Lord, the director of your life, if you will, which is a great word. And by the way, if you're not there yet, I totally get that. I respect that. Like, I got questions. I got so much stuff I need to work through. This is not where I'm at right now. I get that. In fact, Jesus gets that. I think Jesus would say, and I would say, that's okay. Keep listening. Keep asking. Keep struggling with it. But maybe this is exactly where you are. Maybe it's right where you are right now, that line in the sand is your next step. So the question really is like, will I step over that? Will I step over that line and declare myself to be a follower of Jesus and embrace him as the Lord, the leader of my life, and surrender my will and my life to the care of God through him? And if that's you, if that's where you're at tonight, I want to give you a chance to do that right now. So I'm going to close this in prayer, and I'm going to invite you to actually say a little prayer with me, or in your heart and in your mind as I say it. And you might just say, Heavenly Father, just talk to God, just like, Heavenly Father, I want to belong to you. I want to belong to you. And Jesus, I will follow you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to make this decision to declare you are going to be the Lord of my life. Just say that. You're going to be the Lord of my life. I trust you to forgive me, to embrace me, to teach me, to train me, to empower me, to raise me up. But I am going to surrender my life to you. I will follow you. And for the rest of us who call ourselves followers of you, God, we want to hear these words that you have to say to your followers, and we just want to say yes, because that's what we're going to be about, leveraging what we have in this brief moment of time to have eternal relationships on the other side of that divide. And so I pray that for all of us. I declare that for all of us in Jesus' name.